Well, hello fellow freeheelers. In last week's video, I was out field testing Voile's hardwire and spring cable attachment for their 3-pin bindings with leather boots. Now, I don't normally ski with either one of these attachments, but I have put them on every now and then when snow conditions are difficult, or I find that the leather boots just don't have quite enough support for the kind of terrain and conditions that I'm skiing. But I usually avoid them, and the main reason I avoid them because I've found that they're just a hassle to put on and take off. Now, I know that some of you leave them on your skis full time, and that's certainly an option. If you have Voile's traverse binding, they have this heel riser, and the heel riser is tall enough so that when it's disconnected from your boot, it stays down below this heel pad. And if you install it properly, you can clamp this tight against the heel riser, and it will stay there. If you don't get it tight against this heel riser, then you find that this happens all the time. You'll be skiing along and this pops open. But that's not the main reason that I don't leave it attached to the skis all the time. One, there's a weight penalty on the way up. Secondly, the spring cables form sort of a pocket in here. And when the snow is wet and it's compacting, it just builds up in this area right here. And there's no place for it to escape. And sometimes this hump gets so large it's just uncomfortable to ski in. That's why, for the most part, I leave these cables in my pack, and I only put them on when I need them. Now, if you don't have Voile's traverse binding, and you have just the simple 3-pin cable binding like I have right here, the heel plate is not tall enough that you can leave it disconnected from your boot comfortably. If you can see right here, this bracket is actually higher than this heel plate, and your boot's just going to be hitting this all the time. It's just not a comfortable way to ski. And while it's not too big of a hassle to stop at the top of the hill and take your skis off and put them on, what I really dislike is when I'm at the bottom of the hill, having to take the skis off, to take them off, to put them back in my pack. So what I've done is I've done a little modification to these cable bindings to make it easier to put them on and take them off without having to take your skis off. Now, just a little disclaimer here and a word of warning. If you decide to modify these cable bindings, you're doing so at your own risk. I have no idea what the ramifications may be for you, but for me it works out really well, and I'm really happy that I went through this modification. So without further ado, let's get on to it. So here I want to show you what the problem is with the spring cable a little closer up. In order to get the cable to hook onto the binding, you almost have to hold it down to almost a near vertical position. Then you can slide it down and hook it on. And when you're standing on the ski, that can be a little bit of a problem. So what I've done to modify this is I go ahead and I install the cable on the binding, and then I know that this cable will never get any further down in this direction when it's attached to the boot than this. And so all of this material here is excess. I mean, that little bit of metal down there doesn't really do anything to keep the cable attached to the binding through the motion, through what would be the normal motion of the boot. So if you just remove this little portion of the metal, if you grind that away, it'll make it so it's a lot easier to install. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to grind those away, and then we'll take a look at that and see how much easier they are to get on. Okay, the black part's the part that I'm going to remove. Just going to use a grinding stone on Dremel tool to remove that. Okay, here's the original profile here, and here's my grounded profile. So how much easier do these go on? Let's just going to try and see. Still have to bend the spring downward so it's not going to pop off. It doesn't have to get anywhere near vertical. Okay, here's a trial run. Now, I've always found, for me, it's easiest if I put the outside, lock the outside one in first, Lift the heel up and make sure that this cable is underneath the boot. Then hook the inside one in. Get it around the boot and lock it tight. So that going on with the modification seems a lot easier. Now getting them off, that can be a little more problematic. I'll do that, loosen the heel, flip it forward. And I try to get the outside one off first, and the easiest way to do that is to kind of bend the spring down and then force it. If you bend the spring down like this, it gets to the right position, then you push it forward, it helps to pop that off. They go on a lot easier than they come off. So once again, kind of bend that down like this, and then just try to shove it forward. And then the inside one is always much easier to get off than the outside one. I know I have several viewers who have real eagle eyes, and they probably noticed something very unusual about my last test. And that's where I went out with my S-bound 98s, and I had a hard wire and a spring cable on different feet, and we were doing a little evaluation test. And the thing that's so unusual is they probably noticed right off the bat that this was Voile's 3-pin cable binding. And they know that you can't hook a hard wire to a 3-pin cable binding. If you want to get the hard wire, you've got to buy Voile's hardwire 3-pin binding, and it's specially designed for this particular accessory. And the reason for that is that on the side of the binding here, this catchment here has been designed for this flat steel. And the hard wire is a rounded hardened steel. It's just a different attachment. Well, that's a good segue into the topic of my next video. I'll show you how I bought these as spare parts, and then I modified them so I could use them directly on my 3-pin cable bindings. So until next time, be safe and be kind, and I'll see you in the next video.